I think the misconception is that social media is a tool where you can sell your products.
My guest today is a social media and marketing expert.
With great reach comes great responsibility.
You've lived any marketer's dream.
You need to stop chasing and start attracting.
Really touching all the aspects of the marketing workflow and process.
Don't just obsess so much about your brand, but rather about what it is that you can tell and how you can inspire, educate, and entertain your followers.
Mirco, thank you so much for joining me today on Unmatched.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited.
So why don't you maybe introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what you do?
So my name is Mirco and I am a social media and marketing expert, I would say. And I help brands reach a new level on social media and on their marketing and advise them, coach them, consult them, host workshops. And I work with companies from small to big, from tiny startups, but also some of the biggest brands in the world like Nike, Trade Republic, Zalando, GetSafe, Foodspring, N26. So really a broad range from all kinds of companies and sizes. And I am also a design thinking coach. So that's why I love hosting workshops, and I get very excited when I am in a room with a bunch of creative people and empower them to really think outside of the box or achieve really ambitious topics and tasks and strategies within a short time frame. And that's what I love. I love empowering people. I love spreading positivity and also getting creative juices flowing where people might not know that they have it in them.
That's a great description of what you're doing, by the way. I really love that.
Thank you.
But of course, it doesn't really cover the whole journey of you getting to where you are today. And I would love us to unpack all that together. Interestingly enough, you're not only a social media and marketing expert, but you happen to be also the second ever employee that this small company called Zalando, I don't know if you know it, has ever had. Is that true?
Actually, it's the first. I was the first intern.
The first?
Yeah, I was the first intern at Zalando. So David Schneider, Robert Gens, and myself basically started Zalando. I don't want to take much of the credit because it was their idea and I was only an intern. But yes, roughly 15 years ago, we were in a windowless office and started selling shoes, or in that case, flip-flops online. And it was a very interesting time. And by the time I'd left Zalando, it was 16,000 employees. Now it's at 18,000 and they're making 10 billion euros revenue. So you could tell that many stories, of course, were experienced and many interesting happenings were there as part of my journey at Zalando.
Yeah, and we can't stop here. We really need to go back and talk about how this all happened. How did you get to know the two founders, and how did you end up interning for them?
I was very young. I think I was probably 21 years old. I was just studying fashion management at the London College of Fashion. So that's where my career started. Before I went full into social media, I started out in fashion. And I wanted to spend my summer holidays in Berlin, or at least in Germany. That's where my friends were. That's where my back then girlfriend was. And I had applied also to other companies like Escada in Munich and Peek & Cloppenburg in Düsseldorf, which ironically I actually also worked at later in life, but in a different position than intern. And I applied to a company that was back then called Ifancho GmbH, so a cryptic name. And because the office had no windows, David, the CEO of Zalando still, asked me to meet him at a restaurant for an interview. And we ended up deciding that they were two business geeks coming from WHU, that they needed someone with a bit of fashion background to join their team early. And so That's how they hired me, and I had a really amazing summer working in Berlin.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history. I mean, I can tell you so many stories about how my friend from school designed the first logo, how we had to borrow my mom's car because we all didn't have a car to buy the first shoes somewhere outside of Leipzig. And I mean, how we built the first office and all were just building up shelves for the basement so that we can store the shoes. It was just really like startup feeling. And by the time I left to go back to my studies in London, we were, I think, 18 or 20 people, so still very, very small. And then I joined right after I finished my bachelor.
That must have been, honestly, an incredible journey to be able to witness that growth, right? That inception moment and the growth afterwards. There's not a lot of companies that you can look at that trajectory nowadays, right? There's a lot of, historical, really big companies that we don't really have the background on, how that journey was. So it's really incredible, in my opinion, that you can, tell us about it and having witnessed in first person how that all went along. I'm curious about the name because you mentioned that initially there was a different name. So how did you guys come up with Zalando?
Oh, there were so many names on the whiteboard. I remember really the scene when we were in this room and just brainstorming names. And funnily enough, on the board, it also said Mirapodo once, which is the name of a bug with a lot of legs in Spanish. And that turned out to be one of the early competitors. So that's a funny anecdote, actually. We didn't end up going for that name. I think Zalando was better. And then at some point we had Zalando on the board with an S, spelled with an S. And my mom actually said that it sounded a bit similar to another shoe company. So then the lawyers also said, yes, she's right. Or they actually said they were right. And they realized also before instead of my mother. And in the end, we spelled it with a Z. And
wow.
Yeah.
So your mom is part of the history of Zalando as well, not only
I guess
you.
I don't know if she knows it, but I guess somehow she's involved. She also lent
Well,
us
we need
the
to
car.
give her
You're
credit.
Right. We need to give
Yeah.
her credit. That's true.
We need to absolutely give her credit. What would you say? I mean, this podcast is not about Zalando, so we won't spend too much time talking about it. It's really about your journey, going through this amazing time of your life. So I'm just curious to know, what's the biggest learning that you got out of this experience, like having seen the beginning and sort of this amazing growth of the brand. And what would you say is the biggest learning that you took away with you from all these years?
That's a good question. To put 7 years in one sentence or one learning. Well, I think one big learning is if you have a vision and you are ahead of your time, and you are agile in your approach, then when you stick to it, it might just work out. There were so many doubters along the way that were saying nobody will buy shoes or fashion online. I mean, nowadays it seems so logical and everybody does it. I buy most of my clothes online. But back then, it was still heavily retail driven. And well, the rest is history, as you said. And I think another learning, if I may, was also that you just need to say yes to things if they are thrown into your direction, and you will figure out how to do it after. Yeah, throughout my career.
So take the opportunity, right?
Take the opportunity, absolutely.
Not overthink it.
Don't overthink it. You will figure it out. And by just doing stuff, you will learn everything the fastest and to apply it directly. I think that's a major learning that I got there, and it made me really fearless in many ways. And I think that, I got so much out of it. I got so much out of this experience working for Zalando. So many opportunities came my way, and also the time there was just incredible. So I'm really thankful for the founders and for them having trusted me so early, but also throughout my entire career at Zalando and beyond. Yeah, I still meet them occasionally.
How was your evolution while you were there? As in, you started as an intern, right? So what were the different steps that you took throughout the 7 years that you spent there?
Well, right after my bachelor, I returned and I was again, I think, number 3 in the private label department. So at that time, we were launching new brands every month. So I was living every marketer's dream, and we were launching, I think, roughly 15 new labels, new brands. So the whole shebang, from coming up with a name to the logo and the CI to the positioning to the labels in the clothes, in the shoes, to shooting the campaigns, and basically like a factory for cool new brands. And that was so much fun. And then I decided to do an MBA after a while. And when I returned, I once again joined the Zalando team, this time in the fashion direction department, and was in charge of handling different like marketing initiatives with, for instance, the TV spots and the styling of that. And that was really a lot of fun. And that's where I also started getting into content production, because we also produced video content and were working with models, influencers, creators. And within that time frame, I also was pitching for a new project within Zalando. So we ended up starting an internal startup within a startup, although at that time maybe Zalando wasn't a startup anymore, but we launched an influencer marketing platform called Collaborate, where we were able to connect influencers and brands for corporations, and also had like a managed service, like an agency setup. And I was in charge of the whole influencer side of this platform. So that's how I slowly but surely maneuvered my way into the whole social media sphere.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, how did you land on social media? I mean, you've tried quite a lot of things, and as you said, and I think you said it really right, you've lived any marketer's dream of really touching all the aspects of the marketing workflow and process, and having been on all sides of the business, whether it's labeling and packaging and or creating a campaign. That's really a 360 thinking. So how did you decide on actually becoming more specialized on social media, and why?
It sort of just happened naturally, I have to say. I didn't really sit down one day and thought, my next career move should be social media because it's the next big thing. I was always interested in marketing, and I always loved the creative side of it. And what better place is there than a channel where you have to be pushing out cool, fun, creative content every single day on multiple platforms? So since I was at Zalando from the beginning, a lot of people knew me. I knew a lot of people, and there was always this mindset of being an entrepreneur within Zalando. At that time, Zalando had a really great innovation hub called The Studio, which was a cooperation with IDEO, the agency that once developed design thinking. So obviously, I was very interested in what they were up to. And just through that involvement and some others, I suddenly went into this influencer marketing space. And after working with influencers for sort of 2 years, it was enough for me, very respectfully so. So I thought, hey, if they are always producing content, there should be something in it for me. And that's why I then decided to pivot towards social media. And I got a really exciting job offer to move to Düsseldorf to be the head of social media at Peek & Cloppenburg. And that's how I turned out to be a social media expert after many years in the making, from marketing to social.
You now pivot and you move to a completely different type of retailer, a more traditional retailer. I'm very curious to understand what the biggest change there was, because I can imagine that a startup mentality might have been a little bit different than, working for a more traditional type of company. However, social media is social media, right? In the end, the scope is the same. What was the biggest difference that you noticed in that sort of change and leap, and how did it affect maybe the way you're looking at social media? Did you figure out that there's like different things that you need to do, or is it the same principle behind?
Well, you're saying it totally correctly. I moved from one of the fastest growing companies in the world at that time to almost 120 years old back then. Now it must be a 130 years old company. And the ways that they were operating was just completely different to what I was used to. And it took a little while to get used to. I, in the end, didn't get used to it fully. I had really great leadership and really great sparring partners with my back then boss, the creative director. And at one point, he also said that, Mirco, we don't need just you, we need 100 people like you. And
That's great. We need to clone you, Mirco, basically.
So in the end, I think I realized, and the creative director realized, that this just wasn't the right place for me. And I also was in Berlin every single weekend pretty much, because Düsseldorf is nice during the week, but on the weekend Berlin is nicer. And,
I
at
know
least,
exactly what you mean.
but yeah, I mean, social media is social media, but it also depends on the context that you work in and how
And
much
how you tackle it, right?
yeah, how much creative freedom you have, and how much you can do what you believe is going to be right without really long approval rounds and so on. So I think it was a very great time and very interesting period in my life to be there as the head of digital content marketing and social media. And I had a great team, but in the end, Berlin is my hometown. And I think also it made me sort of realize that fashion is not the industry I want to work in anymore. So it was Zalando at the end, but also Peek & Cloppenburg, and then maybe one more fashion project. But I just didn't feel like fashion was where my heart was anymore.
So, I mean, you've been an entrepreneur your whole career. You've worked in a startup, and then you carried that mindset all through your journey, right? Through Zalando, then Peek & Cloppenburg, and then all of a sudden you decide, I want to go from an entrepreneur to a solopreneur and completely go solo. So talk to me, because I know that you've had a little bit of a freelance time and then you founded your company, Piggyback. Maybe take us through a little bit of that process and how you sort of decided that you wanted to do it on your own and what was behind the decision.
After Düsseldorf was over, I was back in Berlin and thought what would be my next move. And by that time, my best friend, Nikki Trott, had moved to Berlin from London, started her own marketing consultancy, and made it look so easy. So I thought, hey, if she can do it, I can do it too, maybe. And she's a very, very big inspiration to me. And I feel like in terms of her career progress, she's always like 1 or 2 years ahead of me. So great inspiration. And I just really love this saying of show me your friends and I will show you your future. And that's why maybe I dared to step out of this loop of being a full-term employee and to start my own freelance gig. And to be honest, I'm still a freelancer, even though I'm working for Piggyback. I mean, it's always this like quote unquote agency, but I'm mostly a solopreneur still. So it was mostly for tax reasons that I founded my company now in a different setup.
Do you find there's a different mindset in how you operate now that you are a solopreneur versus working for someone else? What's the biggest difference that you have noticed so far?
Well, the thing is, why did I even start out my freelance gig? It was not just because of the inspiration, but I got very easily bored. So when I work with clients, I work with them maybe sometimes for 3 months, for 6 months, for 12 months. I work with 5 different clients at the same time. So that's how I got my energy. That's how I get my excitement, that I don't get into this routine that slowly kills my soul, but rather to have something that is exciting every single day. And I think that is the reason why I have been now freelance or a solopreneur for 4 years, because it just never gets boring. Not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, no,
Hmm.
absolutely. I mean, it's clear that, the big difference, there's always advantages and disadvantages to everything, right? So I think, in my case, for example, I've worked in corporate most of my career, right? So basically 20 years working for different corporate, different companies, and always in a corporate environment. Some companies smaller than others. There's a huge advantage there, especially when you're young, because you get to experience a lot of things through the lens of the company. You get access to a lot of resources. You can travel. You can have access to really interesting and cool people that you would never be able to meet otherwise. So there's a lot of upside there. But then as you grow older, you sort of get more experience, and then, depending on your personality, you might, as you say, get easily bored. I can totally relate to that as well, and it feels like a bit repetitive. But then I also feel like there's a little bit of an attitude of, trying to figure out always something new to do and reinventing yourself all the time, right? So I would
Hmm.
say there's always differences and advantages and, pros
Sure.
and cons to everything.
Of course, there's pros and cons, but for me, the pros really outweigh the cons because I have much more freedom, much more independence. I don't need to be part of the politics. I can be an external consultant or coach, and people value me for my honest opinion. I don't have to play any games, but I do miss also many, many aspects of working in a team. Yeah, to have a leadership role and really, really growing the team and empowering them over the course not just of 6 months or 9 months or something, but really over the course of a few years, and to feel that sense of belonging with somebody or a whole team. And also, like, it's great to look back at 6 months or 12 months at what you've achieved, but how cool is it if you have started something from scratch and then it turns out to be Zalando or a unicorn, or have like something that's your baby that you want to see grow.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think it's, in a way, the way I'm looking at it now is really, it's, different stages of a journey, right? So you've completed one stage, and then you're going into another stage, and then another stage, and it's sort of like, almost like a journey ends and a new, complete different journey starts, right? So it's not really that you're leaving anything behind or you're missing anything, but simply the journey just changes, and it takes a slightly different road, and then you get to a different, sort of end point, and then you maybe want to start again. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting concept to look at and not feel that, I think career paths are not as linear, as they used to be, right?
No, and it's so much also about surrendering. Yeah, it's so much these days about building your own personal brand and changing the whole power dynamic. What used to be that you apply to a job among 200, 300 applicants, and then maybe they chose you, and maybe they invite you to the first interview or something. But nowadays, with this whole creator economy, by being on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, etc., you can now really change the whole dynamic, and companies will start requesting an interview with you because they found your content so cool or what you are writing on LinkedIn so cool. And I think that's just incredible. And the more opportunities that you have, the more you start attracting. Yeah, because I really believe in this quote that you need to stop chasing and start attracting. And that's what social media is so great for personal brands. So most of my project partners, most of my quote unquote jobs that come my way are just attracted. Like, I attract them through the content I push out, or through the conversations I'm having on social, or through the case studies that people see from me, or word of mouth. And if you then have these opportunities, you might as well say yes to a few of them, and you can never plan for these
Yeah.
occurrences. Yeah, you cannot
Just
say
be open, right?
in 3 years, in 5 years, I'm gonna be the head of AI content creation at company XYZ or so. Yeah, it's so no one knows what will happen in this space in a few years. You can make some suggestions and plan ahead for the future, and I think that's smart. But you also need to trust in the process and enjoy the ride and just surrender to exciting opportunities. So if something, I did try to decide quite intuitively, if something gives me energy, or I assume it will give me energy, then I say yes to it. And if something feels like it's draining energy from me, then I better get rid of it.
Yeah, that's a very smart approach, and I think it's a very healthy and balanced one. I want to go back to what you said earlier, which I found very interesting. You know, the fact that most of your business is inbound, and that you're basically getting it through what you're doing online. Obviously, I know you from our interaction online, and I know how active you are. What I was really curious is, were you as active when you were not working for yourself? Were you always this active on social media, and when did that mindset change for you?
I think my mindset changed like 2.5, 3 years ago. So I founded my company 4 years ago. What happened was, my idea was Piggyback as an agency was meant to produce vertical video content for companies that already have an event, an influencer corporation, a campaign, and I would then go there with my phone or with my team and piggyback on top of it to produce vertical videos that work for social. So what did I do? I spoke to 100 brands and agencies. I met 30 of them, and I got like 1 or 2 projects from it, which didn't even
At
pay
the beginning of your solopreneur journey, that must have been a bit disappointing.
Well, it was a great learning experience. So I was very busy to have all these meetings. I created some case films and really went around the Berlin startup and agency scene and sat down with my laptop, showed them some cool videos that we could do, and first did some test projects for free to build my portfolio, and then got some cool clients, but they didn't even pay my rent. Yeah, because most of the money went to the videographers. I was just an agent in between. So I changed my approach and was offering more consulting and coaching services. And at some point, I was very inspired by Gary Vee, obviously. Who else?
Our common friend.
Our common
inspiration.
friend. No, he was just, he's such a preacher. And he was preaching about the creator economy and everybody needs to invest into their personal brands. And so I did. And I started posting regularly on LinkedIn, and then got my first really big project for 3 months, and got another big project. And now, Trade Republic, N26, Nike, GetSafe, FoodSpring, really, really big brands, they all found me on LinkedIn. And
wow, that's amazing.
And you found me on LinkedIn too. So I'm here on this podcast because of LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, totally. And what I really appreciate about you is that you are a practitioner of your craft, right? So I think one of the things that I personally struggle with, and why I started to be more active on social media in general, I think I love LinkedIn more than I love Instagram, because I feel like Instagram is a little bit too much on playing on the ego side of things. And for me, it's more about connecting and sharing my thoughts and my ideas, and writing is my thing. Showing my face is not really my thing. But I'm trying, right? So the reason why I started doing this is because I realized I wasn't practicing what I was preaching, as an end-to-end marketer, as a strategist. You're talking about all sorts of different things, from PR to outdoor to social to activations of any kind, but then you don't necessarily execute them yourself. You work with third parties, you work with agencies, you work with your social media team or with your PR team, and then you're sort of like this person that just connects the dots. And so like about 2 years ago, I said to myself, I need to really practice it myself and really understand what it means. What does it mean to do social media? What does it mean to build a community? What does it mean to actually build something from scratch and writing online and sort of like anything that has to do with building is very, very difficult. This was my learning.
True. And how did you
And
make that switch? How did you get from passive to active?
very hard. It
Mm-hmm.
was a very tough transition for me because it wasn't natural. So I didn't go from employee to, working for myself. I'm still an employee and I still think I need to do it because, 2 years later down the line and having, worked through my fears and my apprehensions and my biases all by myself, step by step, I'm where I am today, where I think it makes a lot of sense. But at the beginning, it was really difficult to make the switch because I think we're not taught, that just the reality of the market and of marketing is changing and that everything is happening on social media, right? And so if everything happens on social media, if you do your business on social media, if you connect on social media, if you build a community on social media, why aren't you then on social media as a marketer?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
that's where everything happens.
Yeah, I mean, the best people in my field that I've worked with were also either real or hobby influencers on the side. I feel like content creators, they have just so many incredible skills because they need to do the whole thing, right? From ideation to creation to publishing to scheduling to analysis to community management. And if they can do it, I sometimes feel like in corporate environments, there's a lot of talking about posting. There's a lot of strategizing about posting, a lot of meetings, a lot of emails. But in the end, it's about output and everything else needs to be reduced. So I love that approach. And I love that you do this podcast in your free time. And you also build your own personal brand, not just with a podcast, but also on LinkedIn. And I really appreciate your content. So it's really cool that you put in this extra effort and that you practice what you preach. So yeah,
Thank
respect.
you. Thank you. I mean, to be honest, I didn't want to feel like a fraud, because, I've always also been, I relate to what you said. I've always been an entrepreneur, I've always had this entrepreneurial mindset since, I started my career and I'm also a very curious person. So I really want to know about every single thing. But I really want to drill down into the details. So right now, for example, I'm very focused on social media, understanding all the analytics and what's behind it and the content and the platform for the content, I think it's just really a mindset that most marketeers will need to go through. I think in the midterm, actually, I don't even think it's a long-term thing, just because of how things are happening and how AI is taking over. And there's a lot of stuff that we do that can be easily replaceable. I think you just need to find, as the name of the podcast says, what makes you unmatched, what makes you different, special, what is your thing, your zone of genius, as I call it, that you bring to the table. Because otherwise, I think you're just going to find yourself a little bit left behind with what is coming.
Absolutely. And we need to be, as marketers, much more output driven and use the tools around us for delegation purposes or create systems and automations, because marketing teams will be smaller, let's be
Yeah.
honest. And
Yeah.
content creation will be split in two. One that is really authentic and people speaking to the camera, and people having like lo-fi, authentic relationships with their community. And they will have a different, like a second part, which is all of the content that can be automized.
What would you think, based on what you know and all of the things that you do working with your clients, big or small, what would you think is the biggest misconception that people or companies tend to have about social media?
Well, culture is made on social media today, right? If you like it or not. And I feel like every brand and every person can use social media for the greater good. And, there are so many great movements out there that have started on social media, especially from marginalized communities. And I think the misconception is that social media is a tool where you can sell your products, right?
Yes.
So I think social media needs to be a place where also every brand has a responsibility to sprinkle in some positivity, something that pushes the envelope, something that has a positive effect on the planet or on the society and all of the world's inhabitants. And I think most companies can. And I'm not talking about like greenwashing or rainbow washing or whatever you want to call it, but really truly using social media for something but good, because there are very interesting research papers out there that tell us about how teenagers are less happy after they've used social media than they were before. So I think we have a responsibility because, with great reach comes great responsibility. And I think all the brands should know that and should use it. So I think the essence of what I'm trying to say is tell stories, but also tell stories about something that has a positive impact. And don't just obsess so much about your brand, but rather about what it is that you can tell and how you can inspire, educate, and entertain your followers, right?
I really love that you brought this to the conversation, because I think it's a really big topic, to be honest, that I think as marketeers we need to talk about more, and I think raise it to the surface a little bit more, because I feel that there's such a gap in between how the consumer perceives the content that we put out there versus what we think the effect is, right? And more often than not, what we put out there is too curated, it's too polished, it's too brand driven, it's too much what we think about ourselves and not what actually the consumer is looking for. And I guess, as you say, it's a responsibility to give the consumer what they're looking for. And there's a few things, right? They're looking for entertainment, they're looking for exploration, education, sort of like the behind the scenes of what makes the brand really cool. So I'm wondering to get your perspective of what do you feel, the type of companies that you work with, that you're interacting with, what are the main struggles that you see them going through when it comes to this sort of social media approach and the content that is being put out there versus what they think they want to put out there?
So the biggest struggles are usually the same, I would say. Yeah, they all want more followers, more reach, higher engagement rates, more conversations with their community. They need better systems in place to create a higher output and better content. And they need better reporting to understand what works and what doesn't work. And also boosting setups to spread their content. And I think that is sort of the one line that runs through all of the projects that I'm working with. Not sure if that answers your question.
It does. And I have a follow-up question on what you just said, because it's actually interesting. It's something that I'm very passionate about at the moment, the whole process of content and then boosting. How often do brands create content that is native for the platform that they're aiming for, plus then organically tested before they actually boost the content? Because what I know, I think we're all sort of a little bit guilty of it. It's like normally the process is, let's put whatever content we have out there and then let's boost it.
Yeah.
That's like the short form
true.
process.
And your question before was also multifaceted, right? So I maybe just answered one of the aspects, and your second question goes much deeper. And I think we were all guilty of posting something that shouldn't have been on social media because it wasn't native to the platform. We're all marketeers, and we also usually have managements or clients who believe that the polished content will work well. And I just had the experience that campaigns that look like campaigns never going to perform better than the native content that you push out every week. And I think that brands, some at least, the better ones, are slowly but surely appreciating that and are creating social first campaigns and have been for some years. But they don't look like campaigns. They need to look native, and they need to feel native, and they need to compete with the content that they see on social, in between the content from their friends, their favorite influencers, and their favorite artists, musicians, etc. So if you have a feed, if it's TikTok, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, and you see pictures from your friend on a holiday next to a picture of your friend having a cool dinner party and an influencer at an event, and suddenly you have big typography, a perfectly lit car with text above it to say how much it's using per 100 kilometers on petrol, it's just going to feel like a foreign object. So you need to make sure it's very smoothly embedded in this feed and that it doesn't feel like a foreign object, but rather as a part of it. And then people will also engage with it as much if it hits the nail on its head, and if it resonates, that they will with other content too. So I think that's crucial. And the best companies have this test and learn approach. And what I've experienced very much was that the best ads are always the ones that worked well on organic. And these days, social media is not just where trends are made and culture is made, but also where performance marketing is getting its direction from. Look at TikTok, right? These UGC style ads where people just talk to you casually and then they sell you a product. It's the same now on Instagram, on YouTube sometimes, and I'm sure soon we will see ads like that on TV if they are not there yet. Even they might be. I haven't seen one yet. But so what I usually do is I work very closely with the performance marketing team, and when we create really great content and viral organic content pieces, we refilm or we edit it, we add an end card, we add a CTA after a couple of seconds so that the hook and everything is still the same, but then you add in something that makes it perform much better as an ad, and voila, you have a really well-working ad. And if you have that constant stream of cool content coming in and work closely with the performance marketing team, I mean, then you have a really, really well-oiled system in place.
Which I guess, to be honest, is quite groundbreaking when you think about it. I mean, it's there, and we've done it for some time, but I think the way I look at it now is really a marketing strategy needs to be grounded in social. I don't think any marketing strategy can be put together without social in mind or social first, right? So if you think that way, obviously company setups needs to kind of like work in favor of that mentality, but like the creative departments also need to be part of that workflow. But especially I think the challenge that we all need to overcome, and I think it's a little bit of a generational gap as well, I feel. Somebody recently told me, and I feel like they were right, that mostly in marketing teams, you're going to have, millennials, and I'm going to generalize, I'm a millennial too, that are obsessed with the design of how things look and how polished everything is. But then on the other side, on the receiving side of things, you have Gen Zers who just want raw, real, unpolished content. And then there's a clash, right? How do you see that clash happening in your world?
I sometimes ask myself when I'm hosting workshops on TikTok, who am I, this middle-aged man, now telling people how to do stuff on TikTok? And my first advice would always be, hire someone from Gen Z. Yeah.
That's a great advice.
Yeah. I mean, you need to hire the people who know how their group of peers think and act and what they think is the right copy and then trust them, empower them, give them everything they need, all the equipment, all the resources, and then let them do their thing. And especially on platforms like TikTok, you need to stop obsessing about your brand and make everything look polished. My friend Pascal from Charles and Charlotte always says, fuck your CI to all kinds of companies. And
Everyone, cover your
sorry about
ears.
that. Should we say it again?
We're going to edit this out of the podcast. No, I'm just joking. Just joking. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In reality, the CI is how you see yourself. It's not necessarily how the consumer sees you, right, as a brand. And somehow we really hold on to the brand. What I find really funny, and I would love your opinion on that, is that as brands, we come to creators to do something that is authentic, right? So basically we're saying, okay, you're more authentic than we are. We give you money so that you do something that is authentic, that is not necessarily polished, but then we're going to give you the guidelines of how to do it.
Exactly.
To make it more brand,
On brand. On brand is going to be...
On brand.
On brand is just not going to be a thing anymore, I think, on social, on some platforms at least.
I mean, if you think about the traditional way of, even like, if you just think about how we create content, it's sort of, someone somewhere creates a creative direction that is our view of our brand, of ourselves. And then that is being shot in the form of a campaign. And then from that campaign, you chop up different content that you put on different platforms. And it all in the hope that everything is unified. And consistency is such a big word, right? And everything needs to look cohesive. Everything needs to look the same, as if, I think somehow in our minds, we think that one consumer is going to see all the different pieces of content everywhere and think, thank God this brand is consistent.
Yeah, exactly. This is Stockholm syndrome. We as marketers always think like, oh my God, we need to do everything exactly like that. But in the end, nobody notices besides us. And I love what Gymshark is doing, because they really have a native strategy for each platform. And even if they work with a huge creator on TikTok, they must have a channel owner on Instagram. And if they say, no, we don't want it, even if they paid 6 digits for them on TikTok or whatever, then they still might not post it because they have complete ownership. And I think that's cool. It's also interesting as a strategy, and definitely not possible for smaller social media companies, for smaller social media teams and smaller companies. But it's an interesting approach for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, this is a process. I think we all sort of start to wake up to the realities of what the consumer actually wants today. And and if you think that the consumer is not just like one person, but it's millions and millions and millions of people on different platforms at different times with different needs and different communities here and there, it's really complex to really grasp what it is that you need to do as a strategy to make it work. So at some point I think there will have to be a moment of letting go. Someone that is really brave enough, someone in the org that says, okay, like, let's be brave and let's just do whatever the consumer wants and then hope for the best, Because I really believe that that's really the only strategy that you can have nowadays.
Most likely, yes. Yeah. And especially when we're talking Gen Z, they're so ironic and they're so meta. So much of their stuff, they only understand some of the copy that they would laugh at. Boomers, but also millennials wouldn't get. And they're always like self-referencing and mixing up and covering and sampling and reinventing stuff. So I think if you want to address them, you need to just a way that they can take your brand messaging and make it theirs, instead of you indoctrinating them with your strict guidelines. You need to give them the opportunity to shuffle what you are telling them and interpret it in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
hand the
absolutely.
power to the people, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always been like that, but today even more than probably before, because we have all these platforms to be visible on. What is your favorite platform, and what is the platform that you think is the best to be able to grow quicker on these days?
So personally, you mean, or for a company?
Both. Let's see both. Let's see if there's a difference there.
So my personal favorite platform is LinkedIn at the moment, because it's just changed my life, and I have met many very inspiring and exciting people, including you, Oana.
Thank you.
And besides that, I think like the gold rush is over on many platforms like Instagram or Facebook. But if you want to grow, it's definitely TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Pinterest, and well, LinkedIn. I think they are the ones where where it's still the Wild West in some ways.
Give me a pro tip on Pinterest, please, because I understand the concept, but how can brands utilize Pinterest to grow an audience there?
They also have their own Reels or TikTok clone called Pinterest Watch. And I think a good start would be to repost what you've been posting as vertical videos on Pinterest Watch and see if you can pick up any traction. And then the whole pinning and stuff could come later.
Interesting. That I didn't know. So thank you for the tip.
Sure.
That was very useful. I will put the podcast over there on Pinterest Watch. So your personal platform is LinkedIn. That's where I think we both feel comfortable. I feel it's not such a ego driven platform, right? It's really more
Well,
about connecting. Well,
is
okay,
it?
yeah. There is a little bit of ego here and there. But
Slightly, yes.
a little bit. I don't know.
It's a lot of
Do you
humble
enjoy
bragging.
Twitter?
It's a lot of humble bragging.
Yeah, humble bragging, but that's more like the old way, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's more the old way of posting on LinkedIn. Like, here's a great project that I did, and clap, clap, amazing, right? Are you on Twitter?
No, I used to be on Twitter many, many years ago when I was still in fashion. And if I read my tweets now, they're very cringe.
So you're not going back.
I was thinking about it, and I've been creating so much content for LinkedIn that I could very easily recycle it for Twitter, and I might. I am watching what's happening on the platform with Elon Musk destroying like $30 billion worth of shareholder value in a few months with a lot of enjoyment. And I am seeing what other companies are doing, pulling out their advertising budgets. And it's amusing to me. And it's definitely interesting to see what will come out of it. And also Jack Dorsey starting a new Twitter. And now that's interesting too. So we'll see what happens. But I think we haven't seen the tip of the iceberg yet of what's yet to come for Twitter, if Elon Musk will be able to turn it around or if he's just crashing it against the wall at full speed. For me, it's interesting. I wouldn't bet on Twitter at the moment for my personal brand, and also probably not for a company if I would advise them, but it has huge potential still. I mean, so many people just have Twitter as part of their daily routine, just as much as all of the other social media platforms. And you are able to reach a very, very interesting and also quite well-off target group there. So it's not a channel to be disregarded yet, but yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be on there right now.
Be real. Tell me if Be Real is dead or if it's still alive and we should still pay attention to it.
Be Real, I think, is alive and kicking, but it's not a place for brands so much to communicate. I've seen some few cool case studies of brands trying to crack it. I also read some statements from the founders that they don't want to fill Be Real with advertisings and don't want to sell their user data to corporations, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's really cool and an amazing step because, I mean, they could be making a lot of money, and they are deciding in favor for their community and their safety and their well-being in some ways. So I think that's cool. And my friends use it and they love it. It's almost like a diary for them. They go back in time 1 or 2 years and see what they've been up to all that time. And I think it's cool. I would assume that it's gonna get boring at some point if they don't really reinvent themselves. And it will slowly but surely fade out. Also, with this approach, although I respect it highly that they don't want to sell out, they're going to have difficulties attracting new funding, and maybe it's just going to be a beautiful fad because the idea is cool, right?
I mean, to be very honest, as a true millennial, is a little bit too real for me. So I haven't really enjoyed it. I don't really want to put that sort of raw perspective of myself out there. How about lemonade?
Oh, sorry, Oana.
No, go ahead.
I sometimes feel like I know these notifications come at random times, but I, on the one hand, have most of my notifications turned off anyway, so I wouldn't even get it. And secondly, I just feel like most of the time I would probably just sit here in front of my computer, and that's a bit sad but true. I don't know how exciting these pictures would be.
Get repetitive, let's put it this way.
Exactly. I would have to paint something also to make it interesting.
So tell me about lemonade. How, because you come from a retail space and then, social media plus retail together. Lemonade. What do you think about it?
I've tried to download it, but somehow I couldn't do it. It didn't work. So I haven't tested it out myself. I am very curious about it because it feels like it's really taking the best of Pinterest and Instagram, how it used to be, and make it a platform where you can actually purchase. So it could be taking incredible shares away from Google Shopping, from Amazon, from Instagram, from Pinterest, and hit a sweet spot where you really switch from you going out to search for something that you would like to buy towards really discovering something that you are interested in and being inspired to purchase. So really flipping also here again the dynamic. And if then ByteDance is able to pull this off, and I saw that they were second most downloaded app already in the US for, I think, last week. If they can pull it off to establish this app, and by doing that, spread the risk of having a ban of TikTok in the US, I mean, that's genius pivoting right there. Maybe the mother of all pivoting.
I also think it's a super interesting concept, and it would save us a lot of time and money, and we won't invest in, stylists anymore because the algorithm will just tell us what we like, and hopefully it will also suit us, and everything will fit well. So I think it's really a very interesting concept as well. One last question before we sort of finish. You mentioned before a very interesting topic, and I don't want to miss it. You talked about having notifications off, and it made me think about how are you protecting yourself and your mental health and your well-being? Because you work in a very fast-paced environment. Social media is always on, right? And I'm not social media per se, but I am on social media and I struggle sometimes. And I feel like I need to find ways to put boundaries, because also being curious and having an outlet where I can really just learn all the time and read all the time and have input all the time, my brain just will go ballistic at one point. So I'm curious, you being a professional of social media and having to be on your phone constantly, what are the barriers? What are the limitations and the safeguards that you put in to protect yourself?
Yeah, great question. On good days, I have my phone on airplane mode until 11:30 a.m., which is when I start my daily LinkedIn routine. And if I do that, I feel like my mental health is on point, and I'm super conscious and am able to squeeze in my morning routine, healthy breakfast, maybe some exercise, and then also have some short intervals of deep work. And I'm extremely productive. And then after my LinkedIn time, I have lunch. And then in the afternoon, I mean, it's part of my job. So at one point, I need to turn off the flight mode and go on social and do other messaging on Slack, etc., etc. On bad days, yeah, I'm on TikTok at 7:30 in the morning and am on a basically a time machine. And then 1 hour later, I'm hungry and eating breakfast with my phone in hand, but I try not to do that. So I would say 80% of the time I'm quite disciplined, and I don't have my notifications on because that just distracts me, disturbs me in many situations. So I think that I found a pretty good way on most days, and sometimes, I mean, I slip. And I do have the approach, if I go on social media, I try to have some sort of goal in mind, be it research, be it something for my project partners or so. And if I don't want to be in the tunnel, I sometimes even have a visual cue in front of me, either on a virtual whiteboard or even on a post-it, like, how can this be used for XYZ? Yeah, so that I constantly remind myself, and I sometimes stand in the corner with this post-it on the wall so that I don't get into the tunnel, because it's so easy. I mean, the platforms
Yeah,
are
so you don't
built.
get into the rabbit hole, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really easy to fall down that path for sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
oh, here's something interesting. And there's and I think it's also, I mean, in my case, the one big difference is I don't use social media anymore for mindless scrolling. So I'm trying to keep it really professional, and as you say,
Yeah.
with a goal in mind. It's not
Yeah.
always easy,
I was going to
but I
ask
think
how you do
that's
it. Yeah.
yeah
How do you
that
do
that
that? How do you not?
I liked your answer. On good days, I will start like this. On good days, I feel like there's a goal in mind, and I'm able to turn off the phone at a certain point. And also because I have young kids, I come home from work, and I need to be present with them. And then it's really after 9 p.m. when I can record my podcast and, create my posts for social media and think about my strategy for the podcast, or, think social media. That's my time to scroll. So it's intense because it's late at night. So
Sure.
I'm not always,
Yeah, of course. And
as
during your
awake as I
workday,
would
you
want
don't.
to.
During your workday, you don't scroll on social media usually.
On good days I don't, but to be honest, on bad days when I do, what I notice is that it distracts my attention so much from what I'm doing that I'm trying to not do it anymore. Because again, this curiosity also sometimes works against you, and wanting to know too much and finding out what's going on in the world sometimes is just like you can't be on top of everything, right? So what I do during the day, I turn it off or I put it on flight mode when I need to do specific work on, a presentation, or I need to focus on something or a project, so that I don't get distracted, because that's really easy for me to go down that path. So listen, almost there with the podcast. I have one last question for you, which is, how do you see your journey progressing? You've done already so much, and you've gone through different stages. What do you think is next for you, and what are you excited about as the next step in your personal journey?
I've been feeling like I'm slowly but surely growing out of social media. I'm very sure I will be working with social media for quite some time still, but I feel like my learning curve is getting more flat. And what does that mean? It means that I want to slowly progress towards leading a whole marketing team, be it as a marketing director or CMO, possibly interim, so as a fractional CMO, or maybe even joining a team full time. I'm also considering starting my own startup with a few friends, or launching some other projects in that regard. And I just am very excited right now because so much is moving. I'm having really interesting talks already. A lot of things are moving in the right direction, and I'm just trying to be really comfortable and dance with uncertainty and be able to trust the process again, surrendering that the right thing will come. And I'm very positive and optimistic that something exciting will come. And I'm also interested in moving my career towards more of a positive impact direction, be it mindfulness, sustainability, generative business, clean energy, wellness, fitness, sports, healthy food, you name it, all kinds of industries that I find interesting, and then just see if I can build something that can be my life's project, my life's work.
I find it amazing that you're on a constant quest, which I relate to so much because I'm exactly the same. You're constantly in search of something, you're constantly trying to learn something. I'm wondering, Mirco, is that what makes you unmatched?
I don't think that makes me unmatched, as I feel like it's part of human nature that we're always searching. And it's about enjoying the process and not getting too far ahead of yourself while you are searching, but rather still being able to live in the moment and being present while having a direction. I think what makes me unmatched is that I love just having fun at work, and I love, being around really great people and being a kind leader and being able to not take myself too serious while at work, because in the end it's just marketing, it's just social media, and we're not doing open heart surgery here.
And now I understand why we need to clone you, Mirco. And with that being said, I just want to thank you for an amazing conversation. I had so much fun. I learned so much from you, and I really appreciate your time. And I also wish you all the best in your search, in your quest, and I'm sure you're going to do great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun and lovely to spend the hour with you. And yeah, we will certainly be in touch.